I was pulled into what they called a quick meeting on a Tuesday morning at exactly 9:47 a.m., a time I'd remember forever because of how deliberately ordinary it seemed. The CEO, CFO, and my direct supervisor Donovan were all waiting in the small glass conference room, and the moment I walked in, I knew something was catastrophically wrong. They avoided eye contact like guilty children caught doing something they knew was terrible but were going to do anyway. "We're making some structural changes to improve efficiency," the CEO began, using that corporate speak that always preceded bad news. "We've decided to eliminate your position as senior account manager to save approximately $50,000 annually in salary and benefits. We appreciate your contributions, but this is a necessary cost-cutting measure." Then Donovan, my supervisor who I'd worked alongside for 4 years, delivered the second blow. "We're transitioning your responsibilities to someone already familiar with the systems. Megan will be taking over your accounts." Megan, the 22-year-old intern I had personally trained for the past 6 months, teaching her every single process and client preference I'd spent years developing and refining. I looked through the glass wall and saw her standing in the hallway. Megan was visibly waiting right outside the conference room door, already holding a brand new employee badge and a shiny company laptop. She'd known this was happening before I did. Donovan gave me this fake, practiced, sympathetic look that made my stomach turn. "You'll be fine," he said with absolutely no conviction in his voice. "This industry always has openings for someone with your experience. You're talented. You'll land somewhere great quickly." I realized in that moment they'd rehearsed this entire conversation. Every word, every pause, every facial expression had been carefully planned and coordinated. No one in the room looked even remotely surprised by what was happening. Not the CEO, not the CFO, not Donovan. And definitely not Megan waiting eagerly outside like she was about to receive a promotion she'd earned rather than a position stolen from someone else. The humiliation hit me harder than the actual job loss in that specific moment. It wasn't just that I was being fired, it was that the decision had obviously been made weeks, maybe even months ago. They'd been planning this, preparing Megan to replace me, making sure everything was lined up perfectly so the transition would be seamless. While I'd been working late nights to close deals and maintain relationships, they'd been plotting how to eliminate my salary from the budget. While I'd been training Megan, thinking I was helping develop young talent for the team, she'd been learning my job so she could take it at a fraction of the cost. "We'll need your badge and laptop today," the CFO added matter-of-factly. "Someone from it will help you pack your personal items." I walked back to my desk in a daze, my face burning and my hands trembling slightly despite my efforts to appear calm and professional. When I reached my workspace, the desk I'd occupied for 4 years, I found Megan already there, going through my things. She was rearranging my sticky notes with project reminders, picking up my personal pens, examining the system I'd built over years of refinement. She looked up when she saw me approach and tried to put on an apologetic expression that didn't reach her eyes. "Hey, I'm so sorry this happened," she said, her voice syrupy with fake sympathy. "I had no idea until yesterday that they were making this change. I hope there's no hard feelings between us." That was a lie. Based on her complete lack of surprise and the fact that she was already set up at my desk, she'd clearly known for longer than 24 hours. She'd probably known the entire time I was training her, teaching her everything I knew, answering her endless questions about client preferences and account histories. I didn't respond to her words. I just started silently packing my personal belongings into the cardboard box someone had thoughtfully left on the corner of what used to be my desk. Family photos went in first, then the small plant I'd kept alive for 3 years, my favorite coffee mug, the award plaque I'd received for closing the biggest deal in company history. Megan hovered awkwardly, not sure whether to leave or stay. I kept packing slowly, methodically, trying desperately not to show that my hands were shaking or that I felt like I might throw up from the combination of shock and humiliation. The walk out of the office with that cardboard box in my arms was one of the longest and most humiliating experiences of my professional life. I'd built this entire department practically from scratch. I'd trained most of the people currently working here. I'd brought in the majority of the revenue they were celebrating in their quarterly reports. And now I was being escorted out by a silent IT guy who walked 2 steps behind me like I might try to steal company secrets or sabotage something on my way out. Co-workers I'd worked alongside for years deliberately avoided making eye contact with me. Some whispered to each other as I passed, probably speculating about why I was leaving or spreading whatever rumor management had decided to tell them. A few people had the decency to look uncomfortable or mouth, "sorry," when I caught their eyes, but no one actually said anything out loud. No one stood up to question this. No one asked why their most successful account manager was suddenly being walked out with her belongings in a box. I kept my face as calm and neutral as I could manage, refusing to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing me break down. But inside, everything was absolutely breaking into pieces. My identity had been so wrapped up in this job, in being the person who solved impossible problems and maintained difficult client relationships. Now I was just another laid-off employee being escorted out like I was disposable. That night, unable to sleep and desperate for some sense of closure or understanding, I scrolled through old emails on my personal phone, where I'd forwarded important work correspondence over the years. I reread messages from Harrington Industries, our largest client with a $7 million annual contract that represented nearly 30% of our company's total revenue. The client contact, a vice president named Theodore Harrington, had repeatedly and explicitly insisted over multiple conversations that he wanted me specifically as his point of contact. "Your team is fine," he'd written in one email, "but you're the one who understands our business model and anticipates problems before they become crises. That's irreplaceable." I'd protected this company from losing that massive contract twice in the past 3 years. Once when Harrington Industries had been unhappy with delayed deliverables from our production team, and again when they'd considered moving to a competitor who promised faster turnaround times. Both times, I'd personally negotiated solutions, rebuilt trust, and kept them as clients when anyone else would have lost them. The company had gotten comfortable. They'd assumed the client relationship was secure, that Harrington Industries was loyal to the company itself rather than to me personally. They made a critical mistake in that assumption, and they didn't even know it yet. As I continued reading through old correspondence, I remembered a specific meeting from about 8 months ago. Theodore Harrington and I had been discussing their expansion plans over lunch, and he'd said something I'd laughed off at the time, but now took on completely different meaning. "You know," he'd said, leaning back in his chair with that direct way of speaking successful executives develop, "if you ever leave that company of yours, you should let me know. We'd still want to work with you, regardless of what logo is on your business card. You're the value, not them." At the time, I'd laughed and thanked him for the compliment, but I'd been happy in my job and hadn't seriously considered leaving. The comment had felt like casual professional flattery rather than a genuine offer. 3 days after my termination, the severance agreement arrived via email. I opened it expecting something reasonable given my 4 years of service and my track record of bringing in major revenue. What I found was insulting beyond belief. They were offering me barely a month's salary in exchange for signing away any potential claims against the company. The agreement was clearly designed to get me gone quickly and quietly. There was a non-compete clause that would prevent me from working with any of their clients for 18 months, a non-disparagement clause preventing me from speaking negatively about the company, and a confidentiality provision that would keep me silent about the circumstances of my departure. In exchange for signing away my rights and my ability to work in my field, they were offering me what amounted to 5 weeks of pay. After 4 years of loyalty, after bringing in millions in revenue, after building their account management department from basically nothing, this was what they thought I was worth. I stared at that agreement for a long time, reading every clause carefully. The non-compete was particularly aggressive, clearly designed to prevent me from taking any knowledge or relationships with me. They wanted to own not just my past work, but my future possibilities as well. I didn't sign it. As I reviewed the timeline of my termination more carefully over the following days, I started noticing things that hadn't registered in the shock of the moment. Megan, the intern replacing me, had been given access to confidential account files 3 months before I was informed of my layoff. I discovered this by checking the shared drive audit logs that I still had access to through my personal accounts. She'd been viewing client contracts, financial projections, communication histories, everything she'd need to take over my role. The access had been granted by Donovan himself, my supervisor who'd sat in that meeting pretending this was a sudden cost-cutting decision. The timeline clicked together with sickening clarity. They'd decided to replace me first, then spent months preparing Megan to step into my role, and only after everything was arranged had they actually fired me. The decision hadn't been about sudden budget concerns. It had been calculated, planned, and executed with deliberate precision. They used me to train my own replacement, having me spend months teaching Megan every detail of my job while knowing the entire time that she was being prepared to take it from me at a quarter of my salary. The betrayal burned deeper than the job loss itself. Every question Megan had asked, every process I'd carefully explained, every client insight I'd shared, I'd been systematically dismantled and replaced without even knowing it was happening. On Friday afternoon, 4 days after my termination, my personal cell phone rang with a number I immediately recognized: Theodore Harrington from Harrington Industries, our $7 million client. Except he wasn't calling the company line or my work email. He was calling me directly on the personal number I'd given him years ago for emergencies. "I need to understand what's happening," he said, skipping any pleasantries. He sounded confused and frankly annoyed. "I just received an email from someone named Megan introducing herself as my new account manager. She attached an onboarding document that you wrote 2 years ago. I recognized your writing style, but with her name on it. Nobody from your company called to discuss this change. What's going on?" I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "I'm no longer with the company as of Tuesday. They made some structural changes to their account management department." "They fired you." His tone shifted from confused to genuinely angry. "The person who's been managing our account successfully for 4 years, the person who salvaged our relationship twice when anyone else would have lost our business, they fired you." I stayed calm and professional, not badmouthing my former employer despite how tempting it was. "They made a business decision to reduce costs by transitioning my responsibilities to less experienced staff. I'm sure they have confidence in Megan's abilities." "I don't," Theodore said bluntly, "and I'm very concerned about this change." Theodore continued talking, his frustration becoming more evident with every sentence. "We specifically structured our contract renewal last year around keeping you as our primary point of contact. That was explicitly discussed during negotiations. We thought you'd be running the next phase of our expansion project that we've been planning." I stayed carefully quiet, just listening as he vented his concerns. I didn't need to say anything negative about my former company. Theodore was reaching all the important conclusions entirely on his own, without any prompting from me. "This intern, Megan, is that her name? She doesn't understand our business model," he continued. "The email she sent showed fundamental misunderstandings about our operational structure and priorities. If this is the level of service we can expect going forward, we're going to have serious problems." "Listen," Theodore said finally. "I don't want to deal with anyone else on your old team. I don't have confidence in their ability to understand our needs or maintain the level of service you provided. When you get settled somewhere new, call me. We'll want to talk about continuing our working relationship wherever you end up." After we hung up, I sat in complete silence for probably 20 minutes, just processing what had just happened. For the first time since being laid off, I felt something other than humiliation and grief. I felt possibility. Over the weekend, I had a lot of time to think about what Theodore had said and what it meant for my situation. I'd been so focused on the trauma of being fired, on feeling rejected and disposable, that I hadn't fully considered that I had value independent of my former employer. Theodore's call was a turning point. He'd made it explicitly clear that Harrington Industries' loyalty was to me personally, not to the company I'd happened to work for. They trusted me, not my employer's corporate structure. They valued my expertise, my understanding of their business, my ability to solve problems, all things that I carried with me regardless of what logo was on my business card. The non-compete clause in that severance agreement suddenly made more sense. They'd known, or at least suspected, that I had relationships and expertise that could threaten their business if I left. That's why they'd written such an aggressive contract trying to prevent me from working in the industry. But I hadn't signed it yet. And the more I thought about the situation, the more I realized I shouldn't sign it at all. Why would I voluntarily limit my own opportunities to protect a company that had discarded me so casually? I drafted an email declining the severance agreement, stating that I didn't find the terms acceptable. I didn't elaborate or negotiate, I just declined and moved on. Meanwhile, back at my former company, they were apparently quite pleased with themselves. A friend who still worked there forwarded me an internal company message that had been sent to all staff. The email, from the CEO, bragged about implementing leaner efficiency changes that will improve our profit margins while maintaining service quality. They framed my layoff, and apparently several others that had happened quietly, as smart strategic financial decisions. They congratulated themselves on finding ways to reduce operational costs without sacrificing performance. The email specifically mentioned the account management department's successful restructuring. Reading that message, I felt the final thread of loyalty I'd still been unconsciously holding onto completely snap. They weren't even pretending to value what I'd contributed. They'd turned my firing into a company-wide celebration of their own cleverness. They genuinely believed they pulled off something brilliant, cutting salary costs by replacing experienced employees with cheap interns and recent graduates. They thought they'd found a loophole that would let them maintain the same business with a fraction of the labor costs. What they didn't realize yet was that in some industries, in some roles, you get exactly what you pay for. And they'd just replaced their most valuable client-facing employee with someone who had 6 months of training and no real experience. The consequences of that decision were coming, they just didn't know it yet. I spent the next few weeks going through the motions of a traditional job search, applying to positions at other companies, taking phone interviews, meeting with recruiters. But the process was demoralizing in ways I hadn't expected. Most positions offered salaries significantly lower than what I'd been making. Others wanted me to take junior roles because I didn't have management experience, despite having managed the most important accounts at my previous company. Every rejection or lowball offer chipped away at my confidence. I started doubting my own worth, questioning whether I'd been overpaid at my previous job or whether my skills were actually as valuable as I'd thought. The sudden loss of professional identity and routine made me feel completely unmoored. I'd been so proud of my career trajectory, and now I was struggling to find anyone willing to offer me something comparable to what I'd lost. The job market was competitive, and being unemployed made me feel like damaged goods in the eyes of potential employers. My savings were decent, so I wasn't in immediate financial danger, but watching my bank account slowly drain without any income was psychologically difficult. Every day felt like I was falling further behind, like the gap between my old life and any potential new one was widening impossibly. I knew objectively I had skills and experience that were valuable, but in those dark weeks, it was hard to remember that when every application seemed to lead nowhere. Feeling stuck and increasingly desperate, I reached out to Harold, a mentor who'd guided me early in my career before retiring. I explained my situation over coffee, the layoff, the insult of being replaced by an intern, the struggle to find comparable opportunities. Harold listened carefully, asking thoughtful questions about my client relationships, my expertise, and what I'd actually enjoyed about my work. Then he surprised me with an unexpected suggestion. Have you considered consulting instead of trying to jump directly into another full-time role? The idea felt simultaneously terrifying and intriguing. I don't know anything about running my own business, I admitted. I've always been an employee, I wouldn't even know where to start. You know more than you think, Harold said gently. You've been managing major accounts, solving complex problems, maintaining important relationships. Those are exactly the skills consultants need. The only difference is you'd be doing it for yourself instead of for an employer who clearly didn't appreciate your value. He explained how I could start small, just testing the waters with consulting while still potentially looking for full-time work. Create a simple online presence, reach out to contacts in my network, see if there was interest. The worst that could happen was nothing would come of it, and I'd continue my traditional job search. The idea scared me, but it also sparked something I hadn't felt in weeks. Excitement about a possibility rather than dread about limitations. Following Harold's advice, I spent a weekend creating the foundations of a consulting presence. I built a simple one-page website explaining my expertise in account management and client relations, highlighting the results I'd achieved: substantial revenue growth, client retention, successful project implementations. I was careful not to mention my former employer by name or violate any legitimate confidentiality obligations. I just presented myself as an experienced professional now available for consulting work, with a track record of success in managing high-value client relationships in my industry. Then I updated my LinkedIn profile to reflect my new status as an independent consultant. I wrote a brief announcement. After several years in corporate account management, I'm excited to announce I'm now offering consulting services, helping companies optimize their client relationships and account management strategies. If you're looking for experienced guidance, let's talk. I didn't advertise aggressively or spend money on promotion. I just wanted to test the waters, to see if anyone in my professional network might be interested. I hit post on the LinkedIn announcement and immediately felt a wave of anxiety. What if nobody responded? What if this was a terrible idea? The first few hours were quiet. Then the notifications started, former clients, industry contacts, colleagues from years ago all commenting supportively or sending direct messages. The response was more positive than I'd expected. But the message that really mattered came less than 24 hours after I posted my LinkedIn announcement. Theodore Harrington from Harrington Industries sent me a direct message. Saw your announcement. We should talk. Are you available for a call tomorrow? My heart started racing as I read those simple sentences. I replied that yes, I was available, and we scheduled a video call for the following afternoon. I spent the rest of that evening and the next morning alternating between excitement and terror about what this conversation might mean. When we connected the next day, Theodore got straight to the point in his characteristically direct way. We don't feel confident with Megan managing our account. She's clearly trying her best, but she doesn't have the experience or instincts you developed over years. We've had several small issues in the past few weeks that you would have caught and prevented. He explained that Harrington Industries was entering a critical expansion phase over the next year that required sophisticated project management and relationship coordination. They needed someone who understood their business deeply, who could anticipate problems, who had proven they could handle complex situations. Can you take over our entire account privately? Theodore asked. We don't care about your business setup or what company name is on the invoices. We just want you managing our relationship again. Whatever your consulting rate is, we'll pay it. I explained honestly that I'd literally just started my consulting business and was still figuring out the logistics and structure. He didn't care. Perfect, send us whatever agreement you need us to sign. When can we start? Over the next week, I worked with a business attorney to draft a proper consulting agreement. The terms were straightforward. I would provide comprehensive account management and strategic consulting services to Harrington Industries for a monthly retainer that, calculated annually, exceeded what my full-time salary had been at my previous job. Theodore reviewed the agreement quickly and signed it without requesting changes. Just like that, I had my first major client and a stable income stream that actually paid better than my previous employment. When the signed contract came back, I sat at my kitchen table and cried, not from sadness or stress, but from overwhelming relief. For weeks, I'd felt disposable and devalued. I'd questioned my worth and wondered if maybe my former employer had been right to replace me with someone cheaper. Now I had concrete proof that my expertise and relationships had real, significant value. The beautiful irony wasn't lost on me. My former company had fired me to save $50,000 in salary, and in doing so, they'd freed me to take the $7 million client whose revenue had justified my salary many times over. They made a calculation that I was too expensive. They failed to calculate what losing me would actually cost them. I still hadn't informed my former employer about this development. I didn't need to. Harrington Industries was handling that conversation themselves, and they weren't asking my permission or opinion about how to manage it. A few days after I signed the consulting agreement with Harrington Industries, Theodore called to tell me they'd formally notified my former company that they were terminating their contract. The stated reason was lack of experienced project leadership and declining confidence in the account management team. Theodore sent me a copy of the letter they'd sent. It was professional but absolutely clear about their dissatisfaction. They were exercising the early termination clause in their contract, providing the required 30-day notice, and explicitly stating they would not be open to renegotiation or retention offers. I wanted you to know before they potentially reach out to you, Theodore explained. Some companies try to blame the former employee when clients leave after a key person is terminated. We made it clear in our letter that this decision was based entirely on the current service quality, not on anything you did or didn't do. I appreciated the heads up, though I suspected my former employer would try to contact me regardless. Losing a $7 million annual contract, roughly 30% of their total revenue, was going to create immediate panic. They'd need someone to blame, and I was the obvious target even though I'd done absolutely nothing wrong. Sure enough, later that same day, I received an email from Donovan, my former supervisor. The subject line was urgent, Harrington contract. I stared at it for a few minutes before deciding to open it. Donovan's email was carefully worded but clearly desperate. He claimed he just wanted to understand the situation and have a friendly conversation about the Harrington Industries contract termination. He suggested we meet for coffee to discuss what might have happened. I didn't respond immediately. I let the email sit in my inbox while I thought carefully about how to handle this. Within an hour, another email arrived, this one less friendly. Donovan was now implying that I had somehow interfered with company business or influenced the client's decision inappropriately. The tone had shifted from fake friendly to subtly accusatory. He was clearly fishing for information, trying to understand what had happened and whether I was somehow responsible. The desperation underneath the professional language was obvious. I drafted a response and then deleted it, then drafted another and deleted that too. Finally, I decided the best response was no response at all. I had absolutely no obligation to explain myself to anyone at that company. They'd fired me. They'd replaced me with an intern to save money. Whatever happened after that was a consequence of their own decisions. Staying silent felt powerful in a way responding never could have. Let them wonder. Let them panic. Let them deal with the consequences of their choices without any help or explanation from me. Through contacts I still had at my former company, I started hearing about the internal chaos my silence was creating. Management was scrambling frantically. Losing the Harrington Industries contract had immediately put them below their quarterly revenue projections. The CFO was reportedly furious, demanding explanations and accountability from everyone involved in the decision to replace me. The CEO was suddenly questioning the efficiency improvements they'd been celebrating just weeks earlier. Donovan, my former supervisor, was in multiple emergency meetings trying to explain how they'd lost their largest client. Everyone was pointing fingers at everyone else. Donovan blamed the CEO for pushing cost-cutting measures too aggressively. The CEO blamed Donovan for not properly assessing the risk of replacing experienced staff. The CFO blamed both of them for not understanding which roles were actually critical to revenue. Poor Megan, the intern who'd replaced me, was completely overwhelmed. She'd been thrown into a role she wasn't remotely qualified for, and now she was being blamed for losing a major client, even though she'd had no real chance of success. From what I heard, she was working 12-hour days trying to salvage other accounts and prove she could handle the responsibility. I felt a bit sorry for Megan, honestly. She was just a young person trying to start her career. The real villains here were the executives who'd thought experience and relationships were expendable. My former company tried multiple times to set up a meeting with me. The requests came from various people, Donovan, an HR representative, even the CEO directly. They all used similar language about wanting to discuss the transition and ensure a positive resolution to the situation. I declined every request politely but firmly. My response was always the same simple statement: I am no longer affiliated with your company in any capacity and have no obligations regarding your client relationships. I have no information to share that would be helpful to you. They couldn't really push harder than that. I hadn't signed their severance agreement with its non-compete and confidentiality clauses. I hadn't violated any actual legal obligations. I had simply left their company and continued working in my field with a client who had chosen to work with me independently. A few weeks after Harrington Industries formally terminated their contract, Theodore sent me another document, a copy of the official termination letter his company had sent to my former employer. He thought I'd appreciate seeing the final version that had gone on company letterhead. I read it carefully. It was professionally written and legally precise, but one paragraph stood out particularly. This termination is primarily motivated by inadequate leadership and account management following the removal of the senior project manager we had worked with successfully. Despite assurances that service quality would be maintained, we have experienced multiple issues that demonstrate a fundamental lack of understanding of our business needs and expectations. That paragraph didn't mention me by name, but it clearly indicated that my termination had been the catalyst for their decision. They were stating explicitly that losing me had resulted in unacceptable service decline, and they weren't willing to continue the relationship under those conditions. Theodore had deliberately included that language. He wanted my former employer to understand clearly that replacing me had been a critical mistake. He was taking away any ability for them to pretend this was about something else or to blame other factors. I read that paragraph several times, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Vindication, yes. Satisfaction that my value had been proven so definitively. But also sadness that it had come to this, that a company I'd worked hard for had been so short-sighted they destroyed a major revenue source to save a relatively small amount on salary. The fallout at my former company continued and intensified over the following months. Through my remaining contacts there, I heard that they'd been forced to implement unexpected layoffs that hadn't been planned. The revenue gap created by losing Harrington Industries was too significant to absorb through normal operations. Donovan, my former supervisor who delivered my termination notice so callously, lost his entire performance bonus for the year. The bonus had apparently been substantial, considerably more than the $50,000 salary they'd saved by replacing me with Megan. The irony was almost painful. Megan, the intern who'd replaced me, resigned just over a month after I was terminated. From what I heard, she was completely burned out from impossible workloads and being blamed for problems that weren't her fault. She apparently took a job at a different company in a more appropriate junior role. I hoped she learned something valuable from the experience, though I doubted the lesson she learned was the one she needed. The real lesson should have been about corporate exploitation, about companies that use young, inexperienced workers to replace qualified professionals and then blame those workers when things inevitably fail. My consulting business grew steadily over the following year. Harrington Industries remained my anchor client, but other companies in my industry heard about my work and reached out. My reputation for maintaining difficult relationships and solving complex problems spread through professional networks. I was earning more than I ever had as an employee, with better flexibility and control over my work. More importantly, I felt valued in a way I never had working for someone else. My clients hired me specifically for my expertise, and they paid willingly for the value I provided. As I sat in my home office one afternoon, reviewing contracts and planning strategy for my clients, I reflected on how completely my life had changed. Being fired had felt like the end of my career. It had actually been the beginning of something better, something I'd built for myself, where my value was clear and compensated appropriately. Sometimes the best revenge truly is just living well.